So, my story isn't a typical story, and I'm not sure how you categorize it other than folklore or maybe cryptid. So, a few years ago, I and a boyfriend broke up, and he started dating a girl that, in our small town, was a self-proclaimed witch or lechuza, which, in Hispanic folklore, is a shapeshifter. She would hold parties that involved certain rituals and sacrifices. She had many cats that would die mysteriously. And if you know anything about cats, it's that they don't die easily. She had about 5 cats die within a year, just randomly with no real explanation. Anyway, I often had vivid dreams when I was younger. At this time, I fell asleep on a couch and had a very vivid dream about this same girl. She had this evil expression on her face, and she had spoken to me. It felt like she was delivering a direct message. So, when I woke up, I told my mom that I needed to talk to her, but didn't want to speak about it in front of my dad or boyfriend since they both disregard the supernatural. We drove to a gas station a few miles down the road from our subdivision, and I explained the dream. We spoke about it for maybe 20 minutes before returning to our house. On the way back, on the street before mine, I saw a dark figure on the side of the road. I leaned in, focusing on it since it caught my attention. Now, most times I disregard it as just a person walking, but this time was different. It was like something was forcing me to notice. It was maybe 2 feet tall, and suddenly turned to face me. And when it did, I realized that it was an owl. But it was larger than any owl I'd ever seen, and the face was like a woman's. It had pale skin, and its eyes were human-like, but they had no color or white to them, and it had a hooked beak like a bird. This thing's eyes were pitch black, and they pierced right through me. It freaked me the fuck out. I was instantly filled with dread and overwhelming fear. I began panicking, asking if my mom had seen it too. She said she hadn't. She stopped the car and reversed. I looked back, but I didn't see it anymore. And my heart dropped in my stomach when I didn't see it. I would have felt much better knowing where he had gone. It had all happened in slow motion for me, but in reality, it had took all of about 10 seconds to pass by. We sat there for a few minutes as I explained what I saw, but my mom said she never saw it. As she explained to me on what it was exactly and how her dad, my grandpa, had shown one to her and her siblings when they were kids. And they fly around and whistle like a human would. And if you whistle back, you're answering it and it'll come after you. I wish I could say that's all that happened, but it wasn't. Later that night, around 11 or so, me and my boyfriend were watching a movie when we heard a loud thud on the roof. We looked at each other like, what the fuck? He muted the TV, and we listened for a few seconds, and we could hear something moving around. It sounded like something scratching or scraping against the roof. I began crying and telling him what happened earlier. I hadn't told him because I thought he'd think I was imagining things. Him being a skeptic of the supernatural, he got up, and because our room was at the front of the house, exited our room and walked past our foyer and out the front door. He backed into the driveway and looked up at the roof, but he said that whatever it was gone now. We never figured it out, but it was a very strange and creepy occurrence. And it still haunts me to this day. Yair Suarez, who was 7, was spending a day at the beach with his parents and siblings on the 4th of August, 1995. A family friend called Paula had also come along with her daughter, Melissa. Yair and his family originally came from the Cape Verdean Islands off the coast of West Africa. The wind that day was strong and a bit chilly, as is usual on the Dutch seaside. According to the parents, the children were too small to actually swim and were mostly splashing around in the surf. At the end of the afternoon, Yair's parents took the kids to a nearby beach pavilion to eat fries. Paula, The family friend remained with their belongings on the beach and saw her daughter and little Yair repeatedly climbing into the veranda of the pavilion and jumping off into the sand. She turned around and lay on the sand. That was the last time she saw Yair. When the parents returned to the beach, they asked where the Yair was, and Paula of course thought he was with them. The police were immediately called and they brought along rescue brigades as well as a helicopter and an aircraft belonging to the Coast Guard. The owners of the various cafes and pavilions on the beach helped along with the search as well, and all parties combed out throughout the night. These efforts did not result in anything. However, the police quickly lost interest in the case. Because they considered it a missing persons case, it was not considered urgent. No public appeals were made and the public was distracted by the controversy around the fall of Srebrenica. Furthermore, Yair's belongings, which were given to the police for further investigations, were now claimed to have been lost, and the family was not allowed to look into the files on his disappearance. Witness statements ruled out that Yair had gone into the water by himself. By the time of his disappearance, had become quite cold and his family claims that the boy was too afraid to go in the water alone. Years later, after investigation by a newspaper, it turned out that there were many witnesses who had never been heard by the police. Some witnesses claimed they saw Yair with an older man. Another witness claimed they saw an older man lure a dark-skinned boy into a car with an attached caravan. The investigation also turned up a description of a possible suspect that was never made public. Readers of the newspaper recognized the description as one belonging to a man who had already done time for child abuse. He did, however, before he could be questioned, die. The disappearance is still unsolved. This experience takes place in our family home at Cabyang Avenue in Whalen, New South Wales. At the time of the experience, I was not born, but over the years my mother has told me of the experiences she, my siblings, my 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and my father experienced in the dreadful year of 1996. My brothers and sisters would start to get really sick at odd times, and would start to wet the bed when they were at an age where they could go to the toilet on their own. There was a night that my second oldest brother, who was 6 at the time, got woken up by his sheets getting poured off of him. After that day, my sisters were in their playpen and my brothers were waiting for their food in the lounge room. But then everything stopped and the floor of the inside house was like a whirlwind. Plates were flying and getting smashed, vases breaking. My mother's dress was getting blown up and down. My mom couldn't walk properly because the wind was blowing her, but with all her might, she finally got to the door and opened it. To her surprise, the outside was fine. She saw her neighbor's house, and they were outside chatting. She asked them what had happened, but they replied with, "Nothing," and "Are you okay?" By this point, my mother was confused, and she said there was just a cyclone in my house. But there was one night that made my mom leave the house for good. She was exhausted one night after putting all the kids to sleep, so she decided to have a nap on the lounge, and so did my dad, who went to sleep on the opposite lounge. My mom then got woken up by her head getting smashed into the table at first. My mom thought it was my dad, until she looked up and saw my dad getting flung down in the hallway. After that night, she moved out. She got a call from the people that moved into the house after my family, and they said that the house was burned down while none of them were home. They also were told that firefighters couldn't find out what had started the fire. This is the first story of many that I plan to share. On September 11th, 1947, 16-year-old Beverly Sharpman, known as Babe to her friends and family, registered for her senior year at Overbrook High School. Then she packed a suitcase and walked to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad station. Her whereabouts after that point had been unknown for 71 years. Later that evening, her parents received a telegram reading simply, "Got married, leaving town, will not be back, don't worry, babe." Investigators discovered that she had quit her job at a local radio distributing company the day before. She had hopes of becoming a DJ, according to the one source. She had taken $173 from her savings account and had mentioned to coworkers that she was going to Chicago. But according to investigators, no mayor's licenses were issued to a Beverly Sharpman in any of the United States. The night before she disappeared, on September 10th, her mother, Nettie, said Sharpman had appeared troubled and said that she had something to tell her. Nettie said she hadn't pressured her daughter to share and went to make tea, and Sharpman went out to bed without telling her mother, and that was concerning to her. No one else knew her, or including her brother, coworkers, classmates, friends, or family. Nobody was able to give any details about what might have been troubling Sharpman, nor were they able to shed any light on why she might have disappeared, or whether her disappearance was related to the problem. Sharpman was initially considered a runaway, since it appeared that she had left on her own volition, but authorities admitted that it was unusual for a teenage girl to leave home and never contact her family. Her parents took out advertisements on classifieds in Detroit, New York, Chicago, and more, asking Sharpman to contact them, but they never received any word from her or about her. Tips came in across the United States, but none were ever substantiated. One man contacted Sharpman's family in May of 1948, saying he had met Beverly in Charleston, South Carolina in April. He said she was living with a woman on West Street. Investigators from Philadelphia and Charleston investigated, but no sign of Sharpman was ever found. Our house is around 35 years old. We are the third owners, but only the second to occupy the home. For an unknown reason, the second homeowners owned the home for 10 years, kept it well maintained, but never stayed nor rented the property. The original owners died in the home of natural causes, but I never felt like the home is haunted. A small idea of the layout of the home for reference. The home is a split level. You walk upstairs to get to the front door. Once you enter, you can either go downstairs to the laundry, garage, my den, and husband's man cave, or you can go upstairs to the main floor, where the living room, kitchen, and dining room are visible from stairs. Then to the left of the stairs is a small hall for 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. Only a few things have happened to us personally, and one noteworthy thing happened to a friend. Within the first 6 months of living there, my husband was working on organizing the garage, so he was in and out of the home. I had gone home from work while my husband was walking out of the garage. I, just walking into the door, see my husband pause at the garage entry and say, "Calypso, our black cat just ran to the garage. Remind me so we can let her out later." I respond with, "Okay," and proceed up the stairs, only to be greeted by Calypso, our other cat, and the dog. I go downstairs. I told my husband, and we searched the garage only to find nothing out of the ordinary. He was 100% positive it was our cat. A month later, I was just waking up. My husband was showering, so I was laying in bed being lazy, as I could before work. I rolled over and heard a clear as day in my ear what sounded like an older man say, "Don't forget it." Thinking it was my husband, I responded, "Forget what?" and rolled over to face the bathroom door thinking he was in the bedroom. Nope, he was still showering. So, we have now lived there for 2 years, and I personally have seen the black cat once since my husband has saw it. A friend of ours stays at our house when we are on vacation. He complains about the lights flickering. It's an old house, so I don't chalk that up to anything new. Odd feelings and the animals will stare into the dark hallway at night. I keep my door closed at night with the animals in the room and personally have never had an issue. Though, one time he said he was outside playing in our backyard with the dog at night. There's a floodlight, but it doesn't reach too far into the woods. Anyhow, he said he was playing with the pup, and she brought him the ball, dropped it. Our friend told us that he felt uneasy just before the dog turned around and started defensively growling towards the woods. He said he hasn't heard that sound come from her before. He saw nothing in the woods, and personally she never defensively growls. Who knows what was out there in those woods? Paranormal or not, our friend won't go out that night anymore. This story takes place in the year 1993. I was a sophomore in high school. I must emphasize the importance of the year, as cell phones, internet, and effortless forms of mass communication at your fingertips was non-existent. There are ample amounts of backstory, but mainly I cannot get into it, and feel this story is the only one I can safely tell. You'll understand why as the story goes on. At this time in my life, my friends and I were carelessly using a Ouija board that I found in my deceased great uncle's attic after he had passed. Again, I will not go into many details here, other than it was wooden, old, and had no instructions. We took it home, and my sisters and I, along with my friends, began to play with it. Weeks went by, a few months went by, and lots of shit was happening in my house and with my friends. Me, strongly being a believer in the paranormal, didn't question much of what was happening, as it was witnessed not just by me, but many others. I saw such occurrences change the beliefs of staunch skeptics in a matter of moments. I was terrified most of the time, sleeping with my lights always on or never alone. At times I was even amused by it. We'll use the term "it" here, as I cannot and will not call it by its name. Then came a day in early spring of 1993 that my friends and I were sitting at a round table in the library of our high school. The topic always seemed to circle back around to what was happening at my house. There were 4 of us sitting at the table: myself, Monica, Kim, and Suzanne. I was beginning to get a little agitated and began to feel arrogant. So arrogant that I said aloud to my friends almost to these exact words: "If you're so powerful and so real, then you wouldn't be stuck in my house. So show us a sign you can hear us beyond there on the board." And just like that, the lights went out in the entire library and school for about 5 seconds. When they came back on, I continued my overconfident banter by laughing and saying aloud, "Really? That's all you have?" The bell rang shortly after and it was time to go home. I didn't think much of the incidents after, but knew my egotistical fake act may have some consequences down the line. That night when I fell asleep, I had a dream. I'm not even sure if I can call it that. I can't even call it a nightmare because that word connotates fiction to me. This was one of those dreams, or visions if you may, that you wake from and feel it. You can recite every line in detail as if you're still in it. To this day, I can still feel the resonation and remember every bit. The dream starts off in the morning as I begin to walk into school from the street. I am immediately plagued with a sense of terror and a sense that I was slowly being chased. There was a procession of black hooded figures, fully cloaked. No signs of human life underneath, just a human form. There were 6 of them, all with their heads down. It was broad daylight and they were each carrying a torch. In the middle of them was a very tall figure, again all in black with a red stripe in front of his cloak. He was not carrying a torch, but rather a long pewter staff of some sort. This was when I stopped studying the details of who this was. I knew who it was, and I knew they were after me, especially him. They were not running or in any type of haste. The procession was slow and methodical. I ran in the school fast and frantically began to look for a hiding spot in the library, as that's where my dream put me. I quickly jumped over these bookshelves which were low to the ground, both in dream world and in real world. and balled up on a shelf, hiding and praying not to be found. I then woke up, breathless. I said few words as I got ready for school and onto the bus that morning. None of my friends involved in the library situation or the Ouija shit in general were on the same bus route, and I dared not speak a word of it to the kids I rode the bus with, as most of them I despised. When I arrived at school, finding my friends Monica and Kim waiting for me at the north entrance as they did every morning, I began to tell them the details of the dream. We had just entered the main hallway as I was finishing the dream details, when running from the south entrance, which was a pretty good distance from us, was Suzanne. I do not feel I need to drive home the point that there was no cell phones, and no conceivable way of Suzanne getting any of this info. This is exactly as it happened, and is 100% accurate. Trying as hard as she could to catch her breath, she looked at me and said, "I have a message for you." From him. Not it, I must emphasize. Tell Nicole she can run, but she can't hide. To this day, every time I tell this story, I envision him, laughing still and sing, "I found you." When I was 17 or so, 2 friends and I decided to camp in a field next to the housing estate, so we could drink beer and listen to music as loud as we wanted. This was a huge grassy field on a slight hill, where all the surrounding houses were far enough so that we wouldn't disturb the neighbors, and we couldn't be seen by anyone unless they were extremely close to our tent. It became late, and my 2 friends had fallen asleep. I was having trouble sleeping around this time, so I lay awake for hours just thinking. Around 3 a.m., I heard the distinct sound of grass and vegetation as someone walked outside our tent. I was stunned with terror. For one, because this was a private field owned by a farmer who would probably be angry to find us here, but more so, because I hadn't heard anyone approaching. Just suddenly, there was someone outside the tent. I held my breath out of fear and shock, which is when I heard another set of footsteps belonging to a dog by the sound of it. Filled with dread, I just lay as still as possible, breathing slowly and quietly, listening to this person and his dog walking back and forth outside the tent. I thought we were going to get shot or beaten by this dude. Then I saw this guy's shadow, which freaked me out a hell of a lot more than I already was. It was huge and looming over us every time he passed our tent, and I couldn't see the dog's shadow, even though I heard it making increasingly erratic circulations of the tent. This carried on for around 5 minutes. Although it felt like much more time had passed, the shadows disappeared and the sound faded away, but didn't leave or anything. It was more like they were still walking outside the tent, but with perpetually lighter footsteps. When I was sure that the sounds had ceased and there was no threat waiting for me outside, I freaked out at my friends, still as quiet as possible, and said we had to go because someone knew we were here, and we could get in trouble with the owner. I told them everything that had happened, and they didn't believe me. Thinking I had been asleep as well and dreamt the whole thing, I assured them that I hadn't, and we had to go right now. They tried to go back to sleep, ignoring me because they're lazy as hell and didn't want to pack everything up and go. I gave up too, even though I knew that I'd never get back to sleep. 10 minutes later, the sound returned, just like the volume outside had been turned up gradually. I felt the same dread I had before, and whispered to one of my friends' names. They woke up, and they were looking at me. "Shh," I said. They had already started hearing the noises, and told me to open the tent to see who was terrorizing us. I did so, slowly easing my hand outside the sleeping bag and up the zipper. It probably took 5 minutes for me to reach it, just so I was sure not to make a sound. I pulled it up so violently that I nearly ripped the whole thing in half. There was nobody there. We got out within the space of 5 seconds, and there was nobody anywhere. As I mentioned, we were at the top of a hill in the middle of a field, so we could see if anyone had decided to run, but there was nothing. Even though it was impossible for anyone to escape my seeing them, I'm absolutely positive there was footsteps outside our tent that night. Three years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to hike up near her parents' place in Oregon when we went to visit them for a week. We decided to bring camping gear and to stay the night. I had only been camping once before, and it was in Boy Scouts, so it had been a long time. My girlfriend grew up camping and knows her way around the area very well. So, myself, her, and her parents' dog, Bear, a huge Newfoundland lab mix, headed up the trail. We saw a few people out, but they were mostly just day hikers. People loved Bear and stopped to pet him. So a little after 6 we made camp, set up our tent, and pull out our grub. We had decided to buy big sub sandwiches, stuff for s'mores, chips, and a few tall boys of beer. I fired up a joint and she poured out her guitar after we finished eating. Great relaxing night, and we started winding down, getting ready to head to bed. She was in the tent getting dressed for bed, while I was finishing the joint and making sure the fire was out. Suddenly, Bear growls this low menacing growl I've never heard him do before. I pet him and look around figuring it's an animal or something. We get to sleep at around 1. I wake up and my girlfriend is shaking. She looks terrified. I hear Bear growling beside us and she holds her finger up, talking low. She tells me she woke up to voices. I listen and I hear what sounds like 2 men talking. Then we hear something absolutely terrifying. One of them says to his friend, "I'll take the girl, you get rid of the guy." I knew we were screwed. We had no weapons of any sort. My girlfriend unzips the tent and Bear rockets out. I've never seen him move that fast in my life. I hear one of the guys yell, "Oh shit," and I hear Bear snarling and growling and I hear them running. My girlfriend takes the satellite phone in. Her dad insisted that we carry it and, thank God, calls her dad. He calls law enforcement and they sent people out to there. They told us to stay in the tent. Bear comes back out of breath with no sign of the guys and we wait for the ranger. When they show up, they find no sign of the guys, save for truck tires and some cigarette butts. They gave us a ride back down to our car later that day. Bear got a steak and plenty of love.